are really insiders in terms of the fact that they really know. We have a very special person, Matt Symonds, and we'll introduce everyone, but Matt is a longtime observer and player in the business of business schools and one of the founders of Fortuna, and we'll get to that later. In any case, what we're going to have is two senior admission officers, one from Wharton, one from Chicago Booth, two of the M7 schools in the U.S., to talk about M7 admissions, and in particular Wharton, Harvard, and Chicago Booth. So Harvard, just as you know, has had another really interesting year. They just published their preliminary class profile. They have a record number of women at 43%, and the 5th consecutive year of application volume increases. And that's kind of interesting. In the Midwest, Kurt Allen and his team in Chicago continue to attract thousands of applicants as well. And Booth remains one of the best MBA programs in the world, for sure. And obviously, Wharton remains at the very elite upper end of MBA schools and MBA programs. So we'll be hearing all about that as well today. So let me introduce more formally all three of the consultants from Fortuna. First, we have Judith Silverman-Hedera, who I've had the pleasure of getting to know and actually doing some video with out here in the Bay Area. Hi, Judith.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for having me today. Really glad to be here.
So for nearly 2 decades, she had been a core member of the admissions committee at Wharton, most recently serving as acting director of Wharton School's MBA program. While at the Wharton School, Judith helped to shape the incoming Wharton classes from a competitive applicant pool of the world's best and brightest. She reviewed thousands of applications. My God, your eyes must be weary. Even
they are.
During her tenure. And she always enjoys meeting prospective students, and she's got a really good sense for what's the best schools are looking for. Then we have Julie Ferguson, who spent 4 years at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business as a Senior Associate Director of Admissions. And in that role, she coordinated the choices of basically booth moments, right? You can coordinate the photographs of booth moments. That's wild.
Well, you know, as part of the admissions team, you coordinate the events and sort of the opportunities for people to interact with each other.
Right. And then we also have Matt Symonds, who Fortuna was sort of your brainchild, right? You went to Judith and Caroline Diarte Edwards first, and the three of you kind of created this new MBA admissions consulting firm.
That's right. When I was a kid, I was organizing, I was the S of QS and organizing MBA fairs in about 45 countries around the world. So grew up with all of the admissions officers of the top schools, and Judith and Caroline among them. We've all grown older, me a little grayer, and so when we sort of met together 5 years ago and figured that, that there was in the admissions coaching space, maybe there weren't many former admissions officers, and obviously to have people of the expertise of Judith, Caroline, and Julie and the others that have joined the team seemed a rare opportunity. So the adventure began there and continues to grow.
And Matt actually got his start in the business with Kaplan Test Prep in Europe. You actually started it.
I did,
You also authored a book that a lot of people have depended upon for guidance in the world of business schools, Getting the MBA Admissions Edge. And actually, Matt and I are going to do a little partnership coming forward that more of you will hear about as the days move forward. So let's take a little look at sort of what our agenda is today. We want to talk about what's new this season, what are the top schools actually looking for, how can candidates stand out in the applicant pool. It's generally believed that as many as 80% of the people in a pool are fully qualified to attend a school, but obviously only a small percentage of them actually get in. I want to look at common mistakes that applicants make in their applications to highly selected business schools. want to talk a little bit about what's the best timeline for application planning. And then we're going to finish up the session with a Q&A where all of you get the chance to ask questions. If we don't get to all your questions, you can submit them to info@fortunaadmissions.com and get an answer via email. So a little housekeeping stuff. Make sure you're muted for the best audio quality. If you can't hear us or you're having sound issues, we suggest you use a headset or dial in. The number's on your confirmation page for the webinar. And we have in the background a sort of Wizard of Oz. Her name is Melissa Jones. If you have any issues or problems, you can send a direct note to her in the chat box and she'll try to help you. And as I said, at the end we'll leave about 15 minutes for the Q&A and sort of go from there. So let's start with Julie and take a look at Chicago Booth. So this is the second year that Kurt and his team have used the photo format. So tell us how Booth Admissions kind of likes this question and what they expect to get out of it.
Sure. You know, John, one of the things that I really enjoyed about working at Booth and really resonated with me personally was this idea that as an institution, Booth prides itself on independent thinking and challenging the status quo, and admissions officers are really working to create a class that really encourages diverse perspective, not only in the classroom setting but also outside of it. So over the years, Booth has been really consistent about this idea and this desire to establish fit between the school and its applicants, right, the candidates. And by fit, they're really looking at a mutually beneficial relationship between what the school can do for the students through the actual programming, you know, the academics, and, you know, outside sort of activities, be it student groups or other opportunities to get engaged with the community, but also what can you as an applicant bring to the school? What do you bring to the table that will elevate the community of Chicago Booth, not only in the classroom but outside of it as well? So the way that they've sort of established this essay question over the past few years, really, first of all with the PowerPoint presentation, and now the last 2 years with these sort of choices of photographs, is they want to know that you've peeled back the layers of the onion and gotten a little bit deeper than just Chicago Booth is a top-ranked school, Chicago Booth is an econ school, Chicago Booth is a finance school. They are so much more than that, and they want to really know from you as an applicant, what is it about Chicago Booth beyond that stuff that resonates with you? What is it that makes you passionate, that makes you excited about Chicago Booth as a school, not just as an academic program, but as a community and as an environment? So the way that they've formatted the essay the last couple of years really allows you to express your individuality, which is really important to them, as well as your creativity and your in-depth knowledge of not only the school but the community and the environment that you are applying to be in.
Thank you. And Matt, let's turn to Harvard. You know, Harvard slightly changed its essay question. Originally, or just a few years ago, was sort of introduce yourself to your classmates. And now they're simply having an open-ended question that says, tell us more about yourself that you haven't revealed on your application. How should people approach that?
It's a transitional year for HBS, right? It's as you wrote earlier this week, Dee has just put together her last class after 10 years as the admissions director, and has played a lot with the essay format during that time. It wasn't so long ago that they had 8 questions that you were answering. Went down to 4, 2, and then 1. This is actually a question that they had back in 2013, and it'll be interesting because, of course, it was a question that Chad Losey answered when he was applying to the school. And now that he's the admissions director, perhaps there was some of his influence in there. Perhaps one of the first things to emphasize, I mean, that we're very fortunate that at Fortuna to have a number of colleagues that were associate directors at HBS, and the sort of insights that they share, you know, a mythical school a golden ticket for a lot of people, and to sort of really understand how Dee and her team, and now Chad and the team, organize the entire process. And I think one thing that they always emphasize is that before they even start to read that essay that you have poured blood, sweat, and tears, and refining, and is it just what I want to say, the first two things that HBS is going to begin with are your resume and your recommendations. It really is sort of setting the scene in terms of your credentials, your academic success, your professional achievements, leadership in the community. They really want to drill down with that first. And I think it's, many people underestimate, I think, the importance of recommendations. But here's a school that's looking for the best of the best of the best, with their rivals on the West Coast. And therefore, recommenders who are in a position, to really talk in detail and share insights and perspectives on what makes you tick and why you're an outstanding performer from so many of those traditional fields that are applying to HBS. Again, you commented that the numbers of consultants in this year's class are down from 17 to 15%. PE and VC have also seen a drop. And this is very much part of the mandate at the business school, with 43% women in the classroom. That hasn't come easy to the school. You took a benchmark of 5 years ago, but if you go back 10, those numbers were, 31%. And the school has a sort of an internal working document that would like to see 50% women within a decade. And so to see this class with 43%, it's clearly heading in that direction. Now, Dee has always insisted in those very personal and personable blogs that she's entertained us with that the essay, it's not a writing competition. And Heather and other colleagues, really talk about the sort of authenticity that they're looking for. The question itself talks about what else should we know. It doesn't even say what else should we know about you, but what else should we know. So if your uncle did sponsor the new West Wing of the Spangler Building, you may want to put that in there somewhere. But bear in mind what you have already shared with the school. The resume that talks about all of this engagement that you've had since college, the patterns of leadership that the school is so fascinated by, and then try to match it up with recommenders who perhaps can talk about a particular project that you've been involved in and really do a much better job than you can, or certainly endorse the sort of strengths and characteristics that then you're sharing. But to sort of scratch the surface and really see what makes you tick. Remember the slogan of the school. They talk about educating leaders that have impact. And to be honest, to Harvard Admit and across the M7, I think this holds true. They will have shown that initiatives that they've engaged in, any institution, any organization that they've been involved in, they really have been able to make a positive difference. So make it personal, make it real, and certainly, we want the admissions officer, as they put it down, to make it memorable, and they really want to find out more about you.
Great. And Judith, let's move on to Wharton. So they've switched it up a little bit this year. Tell us how, and tell us how, when you were acting director of admissions there, how do you even pick an essay question to ask?
Sure. So I was not surprised that Wharton decided to add a second question this year. I actually a little bit thought that Frank may leave a baseline for him since he's entering his second year. I thought, well, maybe he'll kind of give himself a little bit of a buffer, but I wasn't so surprised when they went in the direction of let's add another 400-word question that's going to let us really showcase what we care about, teamwork being so important, how are you going to contribute and collaborate with the other members of the class. To me, the 500-word, what do you want to gain professionally out of a Wharton degree was not enough. I think it was really limiting the students, and certainly the ones that Julie and I have worked with together and other members of our team, they were always struggling, well, how do I talk about the professionalism in 500 words with everything else that I care about as well, and have the reader leave with a sense of not only this is what I want to do with my MBA, but who I am intrinsically, and what are the values that I really hold so dear. So the addition of this second question to me was a great move. You'll also notice, not surprisingly, a lot of schools will use this premise Columbia is in the center of business. How does that affect your education? Wharton is now looking at this. This is what really matters to us. You know, I think that each of the schools, as you go through them, throw in a little bit of this is also marketing, and this is what you should know, and this is why we want to know why it's such a good fit for you. So personally, I think the addition of the 400 words isn't really going to throw off the admissions readers too much. It was heavy lifting at some point. You know, I was at Wharton for about a decade, and certainly in the beginning, the questions were not always that interesting to read. They didn't make you sit up and take notice. They didn't always engender this terrific, hey, I want to find out more. I'm finding out what I need to know, but I really want to find out more. So not surprisingly, a couple of years ago, as you know, John, when all of the schools went through a rehaul and began to shave down from those 8 questions at Harvard, 4 questions, 3 questions, and I think now everybody went to one extreme, and I feel like people are coming back a little bit. You know, like we pared it down to the bone, and we thought that at Wharton that was what was going to be all we needed at the time. And so I'm not so surprised to see it kind of widening out a little bit. Additionally, you know, that they do have an optional question, is there anything else we should know about your candidacy? 400 words. I think that needs to be used really carefully, and I think that many students will use that as an opportunity to say, this is where I really need to push my agenda again and tell you why I'm so terrific yet again, but in using other words. And time again, I really say this has to be for information that's not anywhere else. You don't want to try and seal the deal just, you know, by running around the back end. As I'm sure your listeners and we all know that admissions directors and admissions readers and officers go through many applications a day. It could be 35, 45, 50, depending on the day of the week and the season. And so they're really working hard, but they also need to get to the point pretty quickly. So you figure that they want to get to know you. They don't necessarily need a lot of extraneous information as well. But I feel, and it's interesting now as a counselor, and then as a counselor on the other side of the desk, I'm glad to see this additional question. I think it really allows students an opportunity to show more about who they are. I think it gives the admissions directors more comfort in knowing not just professionally, this is what the MBA, this is the job I'm going to have at the end of the day, or this is my career aspiration, but really what the school is going to get out of having this particular student in the class. So I was glad for the addition. It'll be terrifically interesting to see what comes out of that. Is the class going to be intrinsically changed? Are the numbers going to look different when Frank is finished at the end of the season? So although admittedly in the beginning I said, oh, he's going to not touch anything. He's going to leave things as they are to give himself a baseline. I lost that bet. I'm sorry. But I do feel like it's going to be a terrific season for them and giving them a lot more to sink their teeth into.
Yeah, I think you're right, too, that there's this belief that the pendulum swung too far to diminish the amount of essay work in an application, because you also see Columbia this year, Columbia Business School, increasing the word limits on its essays, as well as Wharton's edition of the essay, in part because students and alumni were telling them, hey, we don't have enough room to express ourselves and to basically make our case for why we want to come to Wharton.
And then it ends up becoming like a haiku contest. You know, how can you say 17 words in 5 words? How do you get rid of all your articles? And we've all become pretty good at helping students figure that out. But if you have a lot you want to say, I think it's a terrific opportunity to have, as you said, at Columbia, raise their word count, just a little bit of wiggle room. Although we all maintain that 10% up or down is not a deal breaker. So, you know, as opposed to undergrads where they're in a text box when they're filling out their applications, with the MBAs, if you go a little bit over, no one's going to think the worst of you.
Okay, so the Magic 7, the Magnificent 7, what are the differences, if any, in the admissions practices and what they look for across the M7 schools? Is it all the same thing?
I'll start, but certainly my colleagues are very well qualified to answer this question. It's from a conversation last year with the admissions at Kellogg, and at the time McKinsey was hiring more Kellogg MBAs than any of the other top US schools, a long way behind INSEAD, but for the US schools. And so we asked, so what is it that McKinsey loves so much about Kellogg grads? And they said, well, people skills, which is obviously integral to the whole process and trying to interview as many applicants to the school as possible. And the idea that a Kellogg grad McKinsey can have them with a client on Monday. Second was analytics. You know, Kellogg is perhaps not in that bracket of the unapologetically quant-driven schools like Booth, like Wharton, Columbia, Sloan, but we live in a world of big data, and you know, those guys have to be able to do the numbers. And the third one was humility, and I think you know, that really speaks to Evanston, you know, a small student town with Northwestern, and that sort of close-knit community that is so much part of the Kellogg culture, and individuals that talk about we versus I. You know, that hasn't always been the case in other schools on the East Coast. I think you know, Sloan would similarly point to that same sort of close-knit community and that sense of ownership. So I think that's one example. I'm sure Judith and Julie have many others.
Julie, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so all the schools are looking to see that you understand the culture, and Judith touched on this a little bit in talking about Wharton adding an essay. And the admissions teams are looking to see that you're actually understanding what each school brings to the table in terms of their uniqueness and individuality of program. And so, you know, when the admissions teams are, you know, looking at candidates, they're looking to see that you understand that Wharton is different from Booth, is different from Kellogg, is different from Harvard. They're all amazing schools, but they may not all be amazing schools for you as an individual. And so understanding what each school brings to the table and allowing that to come across in your application, whether it's through, well, actually through everything in your application, the letters of recommendation, your recommenders understanding why you're applying to that specific program, your essays, you know, whatever format the school is asking for, as well as how you tailor your resume, and you know, how you answer the short questions are within the application itself. So really just looking to see that you understand who they are as a school and who they are as an environment.
Yeah, which goes to the need to research each school, really know what it's about, what its distinctive competencies are, and that's actually not as easy as it used to be, because in a way the MBA has become a commoditized experience. Everyone emphasizes collaboration and teamwork and wants leadership ability and professional presence and a high GMAT score and a good GPA from a nice undergraduate institution. It's really hard to get into those nuances of how, in fact, one school is different from another today. Don't you think?
So one thing that I talk to students a lot about is, don't come to me and say you're going to go to the best school you get into, because that shows to me that you haven't really thought about it too much. And we still, on occasion, get clients, you know, like that. And I used to get them when I was
even if they don't admit it, isn't that what they want to do?
Well, but we really want them to choose a school that's the best, you know, and I think that it behooves them to not only, I say this is your trifecta. You talk to a current first year, well, it's actually a quadfecta. You talk to a current first year, current second year, 5 years out, and 20 years out. Because you want to not only see what is it like to integrate into a community, what is it like to then be really engaged in a community? You know, as a second year, they've got their feet under them. And then when you've been working, let's say you leave and you do something for a couple of years, what do you look like 5 years out? And then, you know, not surprisingly, so many students come in and they have a plan, and then 20 years later, they may or may not be doing that plan. So I'm really, really interested for every industry in learning what that looks like down the road. And I think with LinkedIn and alumni networks, it's so easy to do that. And to me, everybody looks wonderful on you know, when you walk on a campus, and all the websites are beautiful. And isn't Garrison Keillor say all the kids, all the women are good looking and all the children above average? You know, it's kind of what you expect. But
you mean that's not true?
It is it is true. They're all handpicked. But I think that it's important for the candidate to say, you know, this may be a brand name school, but it's not where I see myself. I don't want to be in a class of 900 or 850 or 200. I'm much more comfortable where I can be a bigger fish, where I can have 20 other people that really care about the future of American education. And I think that it requires a lot of self-awareness, that you have to really shut out the noise on everybody telling you what to do and say, you know, this is for me, this is my 2 years, and this is what I want to do. But in order to get to that part, I know I made up the word quadfecta, but it's a good one. I think that students really need to take the time to do some research that's not just what they're going to read, but it's those conversations that they're going to have as well.
Sure. Okay, here's the one dilemma that many people have. And it's a real solid truth about MBA admissions that many people don't know about, which is this. You don't compete in the general pool as an applicant. If you're a consultant, you compete in the consulting pool. If you are from Europe, you may compete in the European pool. If you're an IT engineer, you compete in the IT engineering pool. If you're an analyst on Wall Street, you might compete in that pool. To the extent that there are lots of people in these overrepresented pools in consulting, in IT engineering, and in investment banking, how does one rise above the pile? Julie.
Yeah, it does seem like a very daunting task, and we fully understand that as coaches, that when we work with people, it's sort of, it can be hard to take a hard look at yourself and decide, okay, what is it about me that sets me apart? So one of the best things that you can do is to start what I like to call your MBA journey early. And starting the process early versus, you know, oh, the deadline's in a month, let me quickly put together an application, but starting a year ahead of time, months ahead of time, gives you the time to not only research and find the best schools for your aspirations, you know, as Judith was saying, it's really finding the best fit, but it also affords you time to take necessary steps to improve upon aspects of your candidacy that may be a little bit on the weak side.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you kind of have to take a hard look at yourself and practice some tough love and say, I understand that I'm competing against people that have similar skills, similar experiences, are just as intelligent, have just as good of a GMAT score, and are savvy as I am, but understand that you as an individual have something unique and that you bring something to the table. And taking the time to really sort of figure that out and develop that story is going to be so important in distinguishing yourself kind of from the crowd. So, you know, you've got all these people applying to schools that are very similar to you, but if you dig deep enough, you'll find something, whether it's in the far past or the more present past, or maybe it's the present, whether it's an extracurricular activity, you know, such as a hobby, maybe you're really into martial arts or you're really into cooking, or you've spent some time volunteering. You know, that's something that can really set you apart. And I know it's really hard. A lot of our clients work 80-hour work weeks, and they're like, I don't have time for extracurriculars. But if you start early, you can start to build that time in so that you're not just plonking it in your resume, oh, hey, I volunteered at a soup kitchen for an hour yesterday. But it becomes part of who you are, and it becomes part of what makes you interesting to the admissions committee. So two things, right? Starting early and then developing your story, developing the framework for how you'd like to present yourself to the admissions committee, and being really consistent with that across everything, your resume, your letters of recommendation, as well as how you write your essays or how you develop your story within the essays.
You know, this is obviously easier for some people than others. I mean, if you're an IT engineer who happens to be a classically trained violinist, man, you shoot out of the pool like crazy, right? Or if you're a quant who also does ballet dancing on the side,
right, you're good
golden.
to go.
But for many people, you're right. You've really got to draw deep and be incredibly introspective about your life to see what makes you different from the pool.
Yeah.
And
So,
I think that people don't always go to that. You know, they think, oh, I'm so alike the other 50 people applying from Goldman Sachs. What's so different? And
right.
it's really interesting. I think that people automatically think of the similarities and don't necessarily think about what makes them stand out. So we would love to flip the paradigm so that they think, I know there are things that make me different. I just need to figure out what they are, rather than starting from a oh my goodness, I'm looking around and there's 50 of us. What do I need to do? But to, as Julie suggested, like to think about it optimistically and positively first, and then find your way from there.
And going
Your example about the sorry, go ahead, Julie.
I was just saying, going back to what Judith said earlier about sort of finding, you know, being yourself in the whole application process. one thing that I like to work on with clients is developing your authentic voice. So don't try to be someone you're not. Don't try to imitate someone else. It's really be yourself, but be your best self and be your unique self, and really work to set yourself apart so that the person reading your file gets excited about meeting you and inviting you in for an interview and ultimately having you as part of the class intake and having you as part of their community.
Your example of the ballet dancer is well made, John. We had a client who discussed career path, background, and accomplishments, and she sheepishly whispered that she had briefly performed as part of the Bolshoi Ballet, but just figured that business schools really wouldn't need to know that.
Oh my God.
I think beyond then qualities of determination and perfection, the demands to reach that level in any field.
Right.
But I think you touch upon how many qualified applicants applying to these schools that have the test scores, they have the GPA, they have so many of these sort of boxes ticked. And very quickly the business schools, the M7, will establish that we can throw discounted cash flow at this guy, this woman. They'll have no problem with the content of the class. So what are they going to bring beyond the classroom? In terms of the clubs and the treks and the associations, or as an ambassador of this school 5, 10 years down the road. And it's sometimes quite difficult to sort of hold the mirror up to yourself and really look at community-based contributions that you have made. And there's not one in particular, the animal shelter over the soup kitchen, but something that really shows a level of engagement. And the schools will get this sense that in our community, here is somebody that's going to initiate great ideas, probably bring energy to these different clubs, and continue to be a champion of the school in the years that follow. Those are great qualities to be putting in front of a school.
A lot of people, I think, who don't get in are very disappointed, in part because they may not understand the needs of an admissions officer to craft a very diverse class. And one thing, that comes through when you look at class profiles, including the one that was just released by Harvard Business School, is the consistency of the percentages of people from different backgrounds. Indeed, consulting's down, but only by 2 points. PE and VC people down by 2 points. The differences are minute. So there's this remarkable consistency that suggests that there are quotas for the number of people you want who come from abroad, the number of minorities you want in the classroom, the number of women, the number from consulting backgrounds or consumer product marketing backgrounds. Judith, in having had the luxury of actually having to craft a class at Wharton, are there indeed quotas, or would you rather call them guidelines? So we apparently have lost some sound. I don't know if the rest of you can hear me. Oh, good. Well, why don't we go to you, Matt, because your sound seems to be fine.
Oh,
It
got
was
it.
probably Judith's best answer, right? And we couldn't hear what she was saying.
I know, how frustrating, my God. Maybe you should take that same question, even though you've never had the opportunity to craft a class.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
you
talk about those.
Yeah.
You talk about those percentage points of 17 to 15, which by any measure of a Fortune 100 company, if profits were down by that margin, I think they'd be hauling everyone into the boardroom, right? One of the most fascinating stats, I think, from the Harvard class this year is yield. And of course, after 4 years of an 89% yield, this one is nudging 91%, between 90 and 91%. And this idea of across the strategy consultants, the investment bankers, the software engineers, the healthcare specialists, the military, do they know what they're looking for? I think Harvard certainly does. I mean, Dee had Harvard MBA, 30 years involved in admissions and 10 years as the director of admissions, and now they've got the rookie, but he's still got the Harvard MBA. And most importantly, Eileen and the rest of the team that can sort of really guide him in the coming years.
Right.
On the West Coast, you've got Derek and the GSB, whose yield is in the mid-80s. And that they're a little more secretive about what that number is, but it's certainly still very high. And I think if you put those two together, you realize that those two schools are not offering places to the same people. Whether they're the consultants or others, like highly selective schools. 200 applicants from Google, they're going to take what, 16 in the last 5 years. So
Right.
I think on both sides they have a deep intrinsic sense of what they're looking for, whether it's that Harvard profile, the more sort of conservative C-suite, or the more maverick entrepreneurial GSB side of the fence. But I think that this is a fascinating year for Harvard, probably true for all of the M7, because beyond that yield, arguably they're on the back foot. Here's a school with, in terms of degree programs, it's a one-trick pony. They just have the MBA, and hey, if you're just going to have one course, that it be the Harvard MBA. They've got endowment that they don't know what to do with, and that it looks like a building site. They're plowing all of this money into their new buildings. But I still think that they're playing catch-up, certainly with their West Coast rivals. And why? Because if you look at that handful of individuals that are being made offers by both Harvard and Stanford, Stanford is winning a lot of those head-to-head battles. Obviously, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, the whole tech scene plays into that. But a school that talks about change lives, change the world, and change organizations, change the world, that message appeals to Gen Y, that really wants to have that level of impact. Harvard has the word in their own tagline. But I think as you look at some of those changes, liberal arts numbers are dropping coming into the HBS program, and STEM is on the up. Here is a business school that finds itself with the brand and the prestige and the reputation that Harvard Business School has, that finds itself trying to shout and tell the world, hey, we do entrepreneurship in Boston, and we have tech on the East Coast. And I think this is slowly being reflected in the growing number of STEM backgrounds coming into the school. And I think that even just across the river, as they look at Sloan and their big data and fintech, when you've just got one MBA and you want to make sure that you're relevant in all of these emerging fields, I think we'll see a lot more reflected in the sort of the diversity of the Harvard classroom in terms of people with STEM backgrounds or interests in fintech and those different areas. They have armies of consultants and PE and VC. They're coming out of their ears. So it's not just what you do professionally, it's not just performance, but it's individuals that in whatever walk of life they have, individuals that have impact.
So let's see if Judith, we can hear Judith again. Can we?
Yes, I'm back. I apologize. I didn't realize I was miming my whole performance. So.
Oh, well, several members of our audience are dying to hear what you mimed. Maybe you can give us a condensed version of how, in fact, you thought about diversity and crafting a class at Wharton.
Sure. I apologize. I'm not sure what happened, but thanks for bearing with me. So
diversity comes in a lot of different ways, and certainly we've seen the rise in the mid-2000s, pretty much until now, of women coming into the entering classes. Those numbers are almost 50-50 in some cases. We are looking at those numbers as they continue to grow, which is wonderful. And really thinking about, you mentioned, John, how is it that consultants have only dropped 2 percentage points at Harvard, private equity, VC, is there something going on that there's some strings being pulled? And I think that at the face of it, it may appear as such, but if you also look at not only what is the student doing for a living, but what they're bringing in addition to that. I think that that's an important part of the conversation, and I know that all of us are very aware of making sure that that comes to the fore within the context of the application. I think that when we do talk with students about, you don't want to come across in the consultant bucket, because then you're sort of, to the mind of admissions, that may mean you're a one-trick pony. But what are the other things that you're going to be able to bring and showcase about your profile? Certainly, as Matt has mentioned, there is a growth in new industries and industries that perhaps people hadn't thought about. We all, as you had mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, all the schools had sort of a niche. Wharton was doing finance, and Harvard was doing leadership, and Stanford was doing technology and entrepreneurship, and now that is all melding together. And what does that mean for the profiles of who's looking for what? So inevitably, I think schools are developing more strengths that they're sharing with their candidates, seeing a diversity in the candidate pool coming in. And one last thing, because I know I don't want to overstay my welcome on this topic, but the international piece and how much of your school, if you're based in the United States, how much of your school should be U.S.-based and how much should be international, and sort of walking a very fine line with that. When I was at Wharton, we had a very, very high, wonderful group of international students, and that number has kind of slid down a little bit and then back up. And I think that is really a tinkering that goes on in the admissions office to sort of make sure, you don't really want it for a U.S. school. It's not going to end up looking 75% international and 25% U.S. So just sort of making sure that some of those controls are in place as well.
Okay, common mistakes that applicants often make when applying to highly selected business schools. Who wants to take that?
I'll start.
Great. Thank you, Julie.
So I have two sort of personal stories from my time at Chicago Booth. One, the thing you absolutely want to make sure that you do not do is write another school's name in the essay. So make sure that if you are retrofitting another essay, say the Wharton essay for Harvard or Harvard for Wharton or whatever it is, that you actually put the name of the school that you're applying to in the essay. Because that's an automatic red flag for anyone in the admissions office. Actually gets a little red flag, those little Post-it notes, the little tiny bookmarkers, a little red flag that, first of all, it shows a complete lack of attention to detail, right? That you haven't read through your essays and you haven't had someone else even read through it to make sure that everything makes sense. Second sort of personal anecdote is, if you are invited to interview, be polite and be a decent human being to everyone that you come into contact with. I know Judith talks a little bit about, if someone was rude to the receptionist when they're checking in for an interview, that's a no-no. For me, I had someone one time walk in and say, "I'm interviewing with you?" And I said, "Yes." "Unfortunately, you're going to be sitting across from me for about 60 minutes in my office. Come on in." So,
did that person get in?
No.
For me, when I was at Wharton, and we did have something called the Wall of Shame, where we would post these little, oversights about students answering questions really bizarrely, which sometimes happen, or naming the wrong school. And then the good ones, when they would name the wrong school, but several wrong schools within the framework. So they would really, this is why I want to go to Stanford, and this is why Harvard is a great fit for me, and this is why Chicago Booth makes sense, all in one essay. But I think more than anything, those little slip-ups is just missing the ethos of the school, talking about missions or values or important pieces of the puzzle for each of the schools that have nothing to do with the school that you're applying to. And I think that really behooves the student to be very careful about a plug-and-play approach. That essay, everything has to really engender their relationship to that particular institution. So again, sort of, it's almost like an extreme version of using the wrong school name. It's using the wrong school ethos, which can really be problematic. Recommenders are also guilty of this as well. We tended to give them a little bit more of a slide because they're juggling things, but also not something necessarily we like to see too often.
Right.
My HBS colleagues are very discreet about some of these things, but there was a case that I think speaks volumes about the direction that the school is trying to take. We're at the interview stage, and the individual sitting there with, on paper, Ivy League school, 3.9 GPA, stellar performance at MBB, and about 12 minutes into the interview says, corrects the interviewer and says, actually, no, that's not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is this, and then promptly responds to his own question, and of course was doomed from that moment onwards. And I think Kellogg isn't the only one that has dibs on humility, and HBS it has this challenge. I've written about it for Forbes about the trinity of Harvard, Stanford, and humility. I think the school wants you to think more in terms not of 938 other classmates, but a cohort of 90 and a much smaller sort of cohesive group. And yeah, sorry if you lose out on the humility stakes. There is confidence without attitude, and I think increasingly Harvard wants to send out the message: we are looking for individuals that have humility.
Right, indeed. So let's go to our audience. We have a bunch of questions that are piling up, and we're kind of running out of time. But let's go with the first question, which is from someone who is going to be a reapplicant to an M7 school. His name is Arpit, and he would like to know, okay, how do you approach the whole idea of reapplying to a school that has already turned you down? Above and beyond the apparent stuff that you might include in your application about professional growth in the period from the time you were turned down to your new application. What's your advice?
My advice would be to take a really good look at what you did last time. And it may not have been that you need more responsibilities at your job. It may have been any of the things we've been talking about. You didn't know the school. You didn't show what it was that you were going to be able to do with the education. You hadn't done your research, or you sort of weren't really invested in what you knew about your plans going forward. So I think that the default is I'm going to raise my GMAT, I'm going to get new recommenders, and I'm going to take on additional responsibilities at work, so my resume is going to look bigger, and or I'm going to do some extracurricular activities. And that's not always the ticket. I just talked to somebody about this morning, and I said, look, what you've got is fine. What you need is some passion and some real depth of understanding of what you're looking to do. It's really tricky. Schools stopped doing the feedback sessions. I used to spend hours on the phone in the summer at Wharton talking with students that had been denied and letting them know what had gone wrong or what it could do better. And sometimes it wasn't a great answer, admittedly. There was if there was nothing on paper that we could really point to, sometimes it was just a question of how did you come across within the context of your application. So for me, and I would give you that advice, your first point of departure should be strip down that application and see what you did and see if you were critiquing yourself, how you would have felt about your application. Try to, kind of take away the fact that you wrote it and really think about it from an admissions director's point of view.
Right. Now here's another question. Now I think this is a common issue for a lot of people who maybe had too much fun during their undergraduate years. If you're applying and you have a low GPA, how do you offset it? How do you convince people with either a low GPA or even a below average GMAT for the school you're applying to that you have what it takes, you have the aptitude and the diligence to be successful in their MBA program?
I'll take that one. One of the things we talk a lot about with our clients is if your undergraduate GPA and your GMAT are not quite what you would hope they would be or what the average is for the schools that you're applying to, one thing that you can do to mitigate that is to find a school within your area or an online course that you can take that is probably more quant-driven, that you can demonstrate your ability to handle the academic rigor of a program. I think as admissions officers, Judith and I understood, sometimes undergraduate performance may not be as great as someone would have hoped. I think that there is some honesty that has to come with that in the application as you're talking about your undergraduate experience, saying, maybe I didn't take it as seriously as I should have, and that's part of why I really am drawn to the MBA program, because I recognize through the last 7 years of working how important this foundation of business education is in order for me to progress. And in order to show that, I've taken this class and I performed really well. I scored well. I not only scored well, but I also handled working full-time, having all my extracurricular activities that make me an amazing candidate, and I've taken this class to prove that I can handle the workload. So, that's just one thing that you can do, but it's a really significant step that you can take to kind of show the admissions committee that you are serious about being able to handle an MBA program at one of these top schools.
Can you do it through a MOOC? Can you create an alternative transcript with MOOCs today, or will you discourage that?
Judith, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think that students can really find lots of ways to bolster that application, and I think that a MOOC would certainly be, they might want to call the school first and say, would you be okay with this? Wharton for a while would really only tell you about the Berkeley online classes, the Berkeley extension classes, and then they started to say, okay, you can do, I can't remember the name, there was a math MBA boot camp that you could do that was sort of, kind of acceptable. But certainly, we see clients now on this side that are so interested in so many things, they're adding MOOCs in. And I always just say, just pick up the phone, call the school, say, is this going to be okay? I'm going to take calculus, I'm going to take accounting, I'm going to take Fin 101. What do you think? We also recommend it for students that have been out of class for a while and have gotten admitted to school, but want to brush up over the summer, because that wall hits fast. When they show up in August at their schools, they're going to hit the ground running. And I typically will say, have a great summer, but don't go in cold. And a MOOC is a great way to kind of get the gears working again before you show up on a campus.
Great. So Matt, we have a question from Stuart, who wants to know, has sort of a sense for, in U.S. MBA programs, what percentage of the students tend to be international, and how does it vary among the M7?
I guess the typical figures were between, 35 and 40%, and the latest HBS figures, I think, saw a 1% increase around those sort of numbers. I think Judith pointed out that historically, of course, there's always been about 2/3 of the class that is domestically based. But it's very interesting to see certain areas of the world and where they're best represented. If we look at GMAT test taker numbers over the last 5 to 10 years, US test takers, the numbers have fallen off a cliff. They're down to below 40% from where they were a decade ago. And much of that slack, if not all of that slack, has been taken up by test takers from Asia, notably from India and China. The business schools are overwhelmed with applications from those particular demographics. I think it was very interesting to see the European numbers at HBS this year rising. Also aware, and I think Judith can speak to this from a Wharton perspective, a few years ago when an editor at Bloomberg asked me to write about business school engagement in Africa, I came back to the guy and said, how short can this article be? Because there was little or no engagement in Africa. And I think efforts that the schools are making, both in terms of within the programs, Michigan and the IMAT program, HBS now with the field immersion, but also on the recruitment side, to be far more active into those markets. But I think Judith, you've often talked about certain countries in Latin America that were prized or underrepresented. I think Europe has probably looked elsewhere with all of their business schools in recent years. So there are certain parts of the world that are particularly attractive to the M7 schools at the moment.
Okay, here's a pretty vital question, which is how early should one start working on your application? And if in fact you want to employ someone at Fortuna to help you, how early in the process should you in fact contact one of you brilliant people to get them on the team?
Well, we've got, what, 7 weeks to the HBS round 1 deadline of September 7th, and then the dance is open. Sloan a week after that, Stanford a further week after that, and Wharton towards the end of September. And you know, we're trying to fit a lot in. I think, you know, both of my colleagues have spoken about this ability of admissions officers that are reading 35, 40, as many as 50 applications a day, let alone the time that they spend in admissions committee fine-tuning and saying, you know, why Sally and why not Ben? And they can quickly pick up on a level of self-awareness, reflection. You know, business school, it's individuals that have left college, got themselves a few years of professional experience, and I think schools are looking for that that level of maturity and introspection. So, you know, the first step, I think, is really to step back. It's also the chance to enjoy this process. I mean, when you look at the selectivity at Stanford and the other top schools, it's easy to sort of fall into the awe of, you know, is there possibly a place for me in these schools? And yet, to have this chance, whether at the age of 25, 32, to actually step back from the work that you're currently doing and say, where do I want to be 5 years from now? Where do I see myself? You know, I think Stanford does a beautiful job with a question that they have not veered from for 12 years now. You know, Derek consistently asks, what matters to you and why? And so that whole piece of introspection that needs to take place. It's also then preparing other individuals that will be supporting you. And I think, you know, recommenders, we began this emphasizing the tremendous importance of a great recommendation. You know, Judith often talks about so many of the consultants and the investment bankers where the recommendation could have been about any junior consultant or analyst, and really going to bat with a level of specific detail and insight. So when we're working with clients, you know, really diving into that self-reflection, beginning with resumes, beginning with the biodata forms. I mean, the Harvard biodata form, there is a lot of information that you're sharing about career goals, your background, your awards, your achievement. And I think that starting with the work on the resume, and we have some resume experts that still actually work with some of the top schools to help the MBAs put their resumes together for the job market. So real expertise in capturing patterns of leadership and performance. Start with those biodata forms and get those templates of talking points to your recommenders. You'll then probably find that you've freed up a lot of room for what you can then focus on in the essays, whether it's those booth photographs or the second new essay at Wharton or Harvard's very open-ended, you know, what else should we know? So I think, you know, as we look at the next 7 to 10 weeks for round 1, there's a lot to pack in, and there'll be a lot of intensive exchange to really help you to share that narrative. And in certain cases, I think this holds true for the M7. Judith talks about those schools in particular. I'll take Columbia out because they have rolling admissions, but these schools are, as Judith would say, round agnostic. They actually do not care round 1 versus round 2. It's a great misconception that is out there that you apply to the most competitive schools in round 1, when in fact they're so confident. And in fact, Dee used to say to the team, you know, we've got these buckets of the consultants and the military and the bankers and the software engineers. I don't want to fill any of those buckets more than half full in round 1, because we know that round 2 is just as talented and just as committed and just as good. And they made sure that they read every application in round 2. I think where it really matters is schools like Tuck, Yale, Haas, Michigan, Darden, Duke, and help me out, John, you know these schools like the back of your hand, Stern, Anderson. You know, these are schools that will see a spike in applicant numbers in round 2 from all of those applicants that didn't get into the M7 in round 1. And I think, you know, they are particularly responsive. Columbia's by itself with rolling admissions, and they will be filling the class by Thanksgiving. So early decision for Columbia, really look to meet that deadline, I think. But for, you know, the M7, make sure it's the best application possible, and all of the thinking and the authenticity that's gone into that, whether it's round 1 or round 2, and then have, you know, your mind to all of those other wonderful world-class business schools that might be a little bit more responsive to a round 1 application that says you are among my top choices.
So if someone has a GMAT score, would you say it's too late for round 1 right now if they just started their application now, or you'd say they probably could get it done?
Judith, you're working people.
Yeah, Julie and I have a couple of calls this week, and you can get it done. I mean, it's not, you may not be able to get a Labor Day off, but you know, you're about 6 weeks out from Harvard, and you know, a little bit more, closer to 2 months for some of the other schools. You know, the dance hall opens sort of the beginning of September, but you can, and it's going to require some heavy lifting, and it's going to require a lot of back and forth and turnarounds. But you know, I personally like more time. That's just the way I am. But we do it in 2 months all the time. We do it in 6 weeks. On occasion, we'll do it in a month, although we usually tend to get things, you know, at that point, we're just doing a lot of fine-tuning. We're not really necessarily always starting from scratch. But we certainly, we are going to make available, we have a roadmap that we can show you. I think we don't have time to do it now, but we'll make sure that you all have access to a roadmap that we like to show and have you understand what the steps of the process are. And then certainly, here we are, and I don't think we have time to go through it, but maybe Melissa can send it out as an attachment. Matt, I don't know if you want to jump in just real quick.
Well, I think I sort of touched on a lot of these elements, you know, recommendations, resume, but that sort of introspection that we begin with, and then through, you know, crafting essays. And my luxury is to work with people that were inside the admissions office with a real sense of, you know, what the schools are looking for. And I think, you know, it can be a very efficient and targeted process. But talk to us, John. You know, we actually have the I think our free consultations are rated the best in the industry, and it's not a sales. It's to share your background. Talk to us about where you're coming from and what your goals are, and the same sort of level of advice that Judith and Julie were sharing on this call. But it'll be candid too. You know, if you're at 6s and 7s and at a crossroads, maybe round 1 is out of reach. Maybe even this year is out of reach. And the sort of planning that Julie was talking about. Yeah, well, I guess with that slide up there, you know, do reach out to us so that we can talk about your personal situations, and really give you and share this sort of insider advice that I'm so blessed to work with on a daily basis.
Great. Well, listen, thank you to all of you, Matt, Judith, and Julie. For all of you out there, if we didn't get to a question that you wanted to ask, you can ask it simply by sending an email to info at fortunaadmissions.com. And if, in fact, you'd like to take advantage of the offer to have a free evaluation of your MBA candidacy, you have the information right on the slide in front of you. Go there, sign up for it. There won't be a hard sell. You get, as Matt noted, a candid and honest evaluation of where you are and what you might want to do moving forward. Meantime, thanks to all of you, and good luck on your journey to business school. Matt and I, and I'm sure Judith and Julie, are tremendous advocates for the MBA degree. We know that it's sort of a no-brainer decision for many people, and it doesn't mean that if you can't get into one of the 3 top schools that you shouldn't go. This is a degree that has tremendous value. All the research that's been done on the degree shows amazing levels of satisfaction with it. It is, to use the phrase that many schools use, a transformative, life-changing experience. And I'm really gung-ho about the degree and the experiences people have in business school. So I wish you the best of success in your journey to the school of your choice.